For some time, beginning with the end of the Civil War, when the Southern elites were worried about their free labor suddenly no longer there, we have found ways through the criminal justice system to re-enslave people, primarily people of color. Even more horrendous is now with the so-called war on drugs that started some 30 years ago. We have instituted the practice of solitary confinement of men, women, and children without judicial recourse and through arbitrary decisions under the direction of guards and wardens. The United Nations has identified solitary confinement as torture. Tonight, we will hear the voices of some of the people who have been in solitary confinement.
My name is Sean Swain, Mansfield Correctional Institute, Ohio. All I have is this pen, this paper, and the truth. I write to you as a survivor of torture, soon to experience more, in hopes that you will use my account here as you see fit to shed a light on the use of torture in the United States. Within a cage. How can you lock me in a cage? Within a cage. For some misdeed done within a cage, all you can do is feed my rage. You can't teach me anything good within a cage, except monsters control the locks, and in terror, I've lost the keys. Within a cage, I plead and pray, but it simply gets worse every day within a cage. Animosity worsens, empathy is lost, and the days turn into days within a cage.
Solitary confinement is the practice of isolating inmates in closed cells for 22 to 24 hours a day, virtually free of human contact, for periods of time ranging from days to decades. In Oregon, long-term isolation units are called intensive management units, IMUs. In Pennsylvania, they are called restricted housing units, RHUs. In California and New York, they are security housing units, or SHUs. California and other states also use another euphemism, administrative segregation. Despite the variety of names, the general practice of incarceration in these units and facilities are solitary confinement. Let's see if the shoe fits.
Since 2011, 3 major hunger strikes in penitentiaries across the country, plus actions by family and friends of those incarcerated, finally penetrated the public consciousness. It was those efforts that led to, if the shoe fits, Voices from Solitary Confinement, being commissioned by the National Religious Campaign Against Torture and Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. It was compiled by Melvin Ishmael Johnson and Andy Griggs with a grant from Fund for a Just Society of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Here are some of those voices.
August 12, 2012. Short order collective announces agreement to end hostilities.
California hunger strike issued a statement today asking for the end of all violence and hostility between the different groups of prisoners throughout the state of California, from the maximum security all the way down to the county jails. The statement asks all prisoners to unite beginning October 10th, 2012.
We can no longer allow California Department of Corrections to use us against each other for their benefit. Because the reality is that collectively, we are an empowered, mighty force that can positively change this entire corrupt system into a system that actually benefits prisoners and thereby the public as a whole.
We simply cannot allow the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, that's the prison guards union, international gang investigators, to continue to get away with their constant form of warehousing of tens of thousands of prisoners, including 14,000 plus prisoners held in solitary confinement torture chambers for decades.
The people have the power to change things now.
Know this, our spirit and resolves remain strong, and we know we can count on you all.
Together, we can make it happen, not only for ourselves, but more importantly, for the generations to come.
Torture is unequivocally unacceptable under any circumstances. But what has been unfolding in the SHUs is a systematic use of torture by the state for years and decades.
Torture of both minds and bodies
Of many thousands of prisoners,
to break them.
To either have them die in long-term solitary confinement or be driven insane through the psychological torture of years and decades of isolation.
With the utmost solidarity, love, and respect, onward in struggle. Pelican Bay State Prison, short corridor or collective.
Antonio Castellanos, Short Corridor Collective.
Antonio Gillis, Short Corridor Collective.
Sidonie Smith, Short Corridor Collective.
Todd Asker, Short Corridor Collective. My name is Todd Asker. They'll never let me out. I'm going to die here. I know that. But I have a choice. I can slowly rot or I can fight. Fight to change things.
The road to isolation.
My name is Sidonie Smith. By the time I reached 22 in 1980, I was falsely convicted of a murder I did not commit. I was sentenced to serve life in prison for first-degree murder. A series of violent racial wars broke out within the California prison system, and numerous of my fellow black prisoners were being stabbed, shot, and killed on a regular basis. On June 19, 1982, I was faced with a life-or-death situation. To become a casualty of war during a racial riot, or become a beacon to my fellow African brothers, prisoners, and defend myself and my people.
My name is DeAndre Williams. I am being held illegally in prison in solitary confinement in Malone, New York. In 1997, I was arrested upon a false charge brought by my ex-girlfriend. At the trial, I had a 7-count indictment and was forced to represent myself against a biased judge and 2 district attorneys. The racist judge submitted over my objection assault 2nd degree as a lesser included offense after the evidence was closed and after closing arguments. I was acquitted of all 7 counts and convicted of assault, second degree. I was sentenced to 25 years to life. I was transferred out from the Westchester County Jail to Rikers Island in New York City, where they had me jumped and my nose was broken. I was then sent to Queens House of Detention, where I was stabbed in the eye and beaten in the head with a phone by a correction officer, resulting in the loss of hearing in one ear and seizures. All of this was done to keep me isolated and in a state of hopelessness, so that I would do what the authorities wanted.
My name is Hector Galagos, Pelican Bay State Prison. The heat inside, the dull gray bus was stifling, and it roared angrily down Highway 101. The drone of the engine lulled me into reflections of my life. Memories soared past me like the scenery flying by outside the bared and tinted windows. The dismal chimes of chains and shackles broke me away from the sad spell I had fallen under. There followed the sudden realization that the world of oceans and mountains would soon be but a memory of another lifetime. Looking around me, I found other prisoners seemed to be having similar thoughts, but no one dared to speak of them. What waited us at the Pelican Bay SHU was a vacuum of uncertainty where we were all sealed off from everything and everyone. It's a place where one is entombed in a concrete vault with scarred walls depicting the idleness and boredom, and in some cases, the lucency of a previous occupant. It's the world where, for most, the only refuge that can be found is through a dreamless state of slumber.
There is a certain look in the SHU prisoner's eyes that's haunting. A foreboding look from eyes that themselves have stared into the eyes of madness and human cruelty. Eyes that have looked far into the abyss of emptiness. Eyes belonging to a species of a lesser God.
Pelican Bay State Prison. It's a supermax prison located in Crescent City, California. It is explicitly designed to keep, quote, California's worst of the worst, unquote, in solitary confinement. It takes its name from a shallow bay in the Pacific coast about 2 miles to the west. The prison lies in a detached section of Crescent City, which is several miles north of the urban area. Prisoners go to the SHU for various reasons and for various lengths of time. If one has committed a specific crime or broken a prison rule, he or she is given a determined amount of time in administrative segregation. But for those who have been accused of gang affiliation, also known as validation, their sentence is open-ended or indeterminate. Often the only way for those to get out of the SHU is to debrief, which means to tell of others who have gang affiliations.
My name is Louis Esquivel, Pelican Bay State Prison. I've been here 15 years, and if you knew for what, it would make you sad. And I don't want that for you or anyone. I was once asked why I didn't like to talk about this place or solitary confinement. And well, I say it's because if I share with you, it's like letting you into this world. And what I experience here, you would also live. And I wouldn't want that for anyone to experience solitary confinement. I'm 44 years old. I've been in prison 17 years. You might be asking, how I ended up in solitary confinement? Well, you see, most of the time, it's by people having tattoos demeaning another race, fabricating lies to benefit themselves. By that, I mean lies about other people. who then end up in solitary confinement. Once you're here, it's difficult to get out. That's how I ended up in solitary confinement. Good night, and thank you for listening.
My name is Sidonie Smith. Ku Klux Klan Department of Corrections has held me in solitary confinement for the past 28 years for my political beliefs and spiritual morality. As a new African revolutionary nationalist, if I undergo their debriefing, to which I have refused to do for the past 28 years and shall not change my mind, I ask myself, what weight does customs hold under the law? For though it may be termed debriefing, using a euphemism does not change what it is, betraying a confidence. Committing an act of treachery for personal gain, considering how our community in the U.S. was brought into being and considering the command and control needs which existed from the get-go. If any community has a historical aversion to stoolies, tattlers, rats, and the like, isn't it ours? Therefore, I ask, I shall not die before my tormentors in the KKK, Department of Corrections, government, turn this freedom fighter into a debriefer. I shall never be found among the broken men of my era.
Herman Wallace was a courageous fighter for justice, a political prisoner, locked up by this system in conditions of torture. He was in solitary confinement for 41 years. On October 1st, 2013, Herman Wallace was finally free after a federal judge ruled that his original indictment in the killing of a prison guard had been unconstitutional. 3 days later, on a Friday morning, October 4th, Herman Wallace died. He was 71.
Hello, my name is Dayvon Williams. I offer you this food for thought. Sometimes I feel as though I'm walking through a cemetery of lost souls. Seeing as how almost everyone around me is either already dead, in the process of dying, or simply withering away like a corpse left to rot in some decrepit grave with the name and epitaph erased. This is where I am forced to dwell, in the abyss of shame, weary, full of frustrated rage and soul-wrenching pains and prolonged battles that start anew. Night after night and day after day.
I never saw the sky or felt the warmth of the sun or breeze pass by me, the trees and grass or a raindrop. I never knew how painful it could be to be denied nature itself. I had a small, narrow window which did not open. All I could see was brick walls and nothing more. I remember from those brick walls was a small plant growing from within the cracks of the brick. That was my only part of nature that gave me hope. As the wind would blow against the leaves of the plant, I would actually close my eyes and pretend this very wind was blowing against my face. I know, it sounds crazy, but it was the only part of nature that I had. Then one day, I couldn't stand it, and so I just so desperately needed to feel real air. So I started to scrape the seal from the windows with my fingertips. I was determined to make an opening. I scraped, and I scraped, and I scraped. I scraped for 3 months until my fingers bled. And I was able to make a small opening, just large enough to put one side of my nostril against the opening. And I took in and inhaled a breath. That's all I needed to survive. The officers there, they felt sorry for me, and they'd bring me a paper and pen to keep myself busy with being I had nothing, and there's where I started to doodle on paper. And from there was how I became an artist. I never in my life knew how to draw. I couldn't draw a heart to save myself. But after 3 years of the madness of being locked down like an animal, instead of letting it get to me, I took all of my pain and I put it on paper, and before I knew it, I had art.
The author of this letter, name unknown, is a 45-year-old mother of 3. She was locked up in segregation in a New Jersey state prison.
Over 80,000 prisoners languish daily in some form of segregation in United States prisons. 25,000 of these inmates are held in supermax prisons, facilities made up solely or mostly of solitary cells.
My name is Toby Chavez, New Mexico Penitentiary. Living life in solitary confinement has been the most horrendous experience I have had to endure in all my 43 years on this earth. I've been in prison for 15 years, 13 of them in solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is designed to dehumanize, cause a person to become dependent, and spiritually break an inmate to the core of his soul. Each and every day that comes and goes takes a piece of humanity away from me to the point I don't really know who I am. The lack of human contact I have with other inmates is like being thrown back into the hole and completely forgotten. I haven't been able to hug, kiss, or hold a family member in over 14 years. I'm not able to receive visits from my wife or have any type of real quality time with my loved ones. I'm stuck, alone, and have very few words I can speak with other human beings. I'm forced to eat every meal, exercise, and play games by myself. I laugh at myself sometimes because it's the only voice I can hear. My own shadow has literally become my only friend. If and when I get the opportunity to speak with my wife, mom, or loved ones, I have to put on a mask with a smile, because I never want to see them to see this monster I'm becoming by the psychological damage created by solitary confinement. I live each day contemplating death, throwing in the towel, just calling it quits. A person can only take so much loneliness.
My name is Martin Bibbs, Pelican Bay State Prison. A view from the SHU. The SHU on the mind is like drowning or being caught in quicksand when you first realize your plight. You fight fruitlessly with all your might to save yourself. But at some point, you realize that your fate is irreversible and your ultimate demise is only a matter of time. So you let go. Hopelessness sets in, believing no one can hear you. No one will help you, and no one cares. you are so mentally worn out and emotionally exhausted that you cannot even help yourself. That sense of hopelessness is the final distress that befalls a long-term SHU prisoner before the cruel and stupid, sadistic part of it all begins, the descent into madness. SHU syndrome now is when you begin to live and adapt to the distorted world of the SHU. In order to survive, exist, one must distort his mind to make an abnormal existence normal. It's a vision of reality. As you must adjust your eyes to light to bring into focus that which is around you. So must a SHU prisoner distort his mind in order to bring into focus his new reality. One cannot hold on to normalcy. For normal in an abnormal world is craziness. The fact is, the battle of the SHU prisoner's soul, the death grip is of sanity. The irony of it all is that for a SHU prisoner to hold on to his sanity, he must embrace, accept his insanity. It has been said for hundreds of years that those whom the gods wish to destroy, first they drive mad. That the SHU is an objective. But there are no gods amongst mortal men, only the Spirit of Jesus Christ.
No one has the right to drive another human being to madness, deliberately by any means, yet the casualties of the SHU are numerous. Hundreds of SHU prisoners have been driven mad, stir-crazy, by long-term SHU isolation. And although not directly, but indirectly, all society has contributed to those atrocities. For it is your votes and your tax dollars that feed the SHU machine that destroys men's souls.
Love, kindness, and compassion are the nutrients that feed to giver more than the receiver. I don't ask for a reprieve of my prison sentence, only for compassion and release of mental torture of the long-term isolation. May your heart be full.
My name is Darrell Barnett, Pelican Bay State Prison. Despite the mental, emotional, and physical challenging of enduring life inside these concrete tombs, based solely on the politics of paranoia and the presumption of guilt, my spirit remains undauntedly resilient, free and strong. I too consider myself progressive, and being warehoused inside these modern dungeons for almost 4 decades does not define my identity nor personhood. I reject the dehumanizing, demonizing, and denigrating labels or language that marginalize my worth as a human being to be no more valuable than some chimpanzee or other captive species imprisoned at the city's zoo. While reading our 4 guiding principles that represent our core values and tradition, I could not help but think of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the upcoming celebration to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. Dr. King once said, "Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, and the tireless exertion and passionate concern of dedicated individuals.
On many levels, Dr. King would be disappointed, especially when his own life and legacy has become so marginalized, as if he was a New Age Santa Claus. He is only relegated to the "I have a dream" speech. He is portrayed as less critical, less challenging, less provocative. He would probably feel betrayed by some of the men who stood shoulder to shoulder with him, but now misuse his name for personal gain and ambition. No one ever speaks about his position on war, poverty, hunger. He would be disappointed at the indifference, the lack of tolerance, mistrust, fear-mongering, economic inequalities, mass incarceration, economic disparities, homelessness, torture, senseless wars, racial profiling. I think we honor his legacy by continuing his unfinished work.
What about the families of those locked up and condemned to these tombs of the living dead? How does being isolated from their families affect them? Many of them do continue the work.
My name is Irene Huerta, and I am the wife of Gabriel Huerta. My husband has been in Pelican Bay prison for 28 years, and I stand here as a proud wife because he endured all 3 hunger strikes. I told him that CDC was not going to budge and to let us continue the fight. Here we are, continuing the fight, and I want to thank all of the families.
My name is Maria Levin. My brother is Sidonie Smith, who is in the SHU in Pelican Bay. Today is day 24 of the historic hunger strike of prisoners held in solitary confinement. The 5 core demands are just human things that you and I would respect. Number 1, end group punishment and administrative abuse. Number 2, abolish the debriefing policy and modify the gang status criteria. Number 3, comply with United States Commission recommendations to end long-term solitary confinement. Number 4, provide nutritious meals. And number 5, create and expand constructive programs. Who would not want a person locked in solitary confinement to have a program that gets them acclimated to the public? We stand together on the outside as they stand together on the inside.
My name is Alex Sanchez. Thank you to all the family members who are here and that have loved ones inside the prison. I would like to say that in 1993, there was a truce among the gangs. We know that getting people involved to do violence prevention in our communities have to come from people who used to be part of the problem. Support the agreement to end all hostilities in the prisons of California.
My name is Georgiana Williams, and my oldest son was in the SHU at Pelican Bay State Prison. You worry day after day if your child is okay. You can't visit him because it's so far away, and he can't call. All you can do is write. You don't know whether or not your child is dead or alive. And all you can do is pray.
In the top 50 of the 250 plus immigration detention facilities across the United States, on any given day, 300 immigrants are held in solitary confinement. Most of these detention centers are privately run.
This is Anna's story. Anna is a victim of sex trafficking, and instead of protecting her, the U.S. government detained her in a county jail contracting with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. She was unable to contact her daughter, and male guards abused her, taking away her mattress and forcing her to sleep on the cement floor of her cell while she was in solitary confinement. Community initiatives for visiting immigrants in confinement ended her isolation and abuse by connecting her to a volunteer visitor, an attorney, and her 8-year-old daughter. Anna eventually received a T visa for victims of human trafficking, was released after a 1.5 years in confinement, and now lives in the United States with her daughter.
The United States immigration detention is built upon a system of isolation. Not only because we rely on solitary confinement more than any other democratic nation in the world, but also because the system legally deprives immigrants of any connection to the outside world. Ending isolation starts with ending the practice of solitary confinement. Statement of Christina Villalmo, co-founder and executive director of Community Involvement Visiting Immigration Confinement, also known as CIVIC.
On Friday, October 11, we drove 130 miles from our home in Newbury Park out into the desert. We were invited to tour a modern corporate prison and detention center located along the old 20 mule team route to Death Valley. We turned off Highway 14 at California City Boulevard, somewhere north of Mojave.
The landscape there is a vast dry valley of sand, desert, rock, and chrysote bush. We could see a dark patch of green perhaps 20 miles away, which was the small town of California City. Further beyond the town, before the far ridges, were some long white rectangular structures that stood out from the desert terrain. This was the California City Correctional Center, owned and operated by the CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, a private company.
When we walked into the pod for solitary confinement, called the SHU, or Secure Housing Unit, we saw 2 tiers of locked cells behind a locked chain-link corridor. Now, instead of tables and chairs and stools, there was an open space with a desk for guards and one LexisNexis computer encased in its own cage. As the warden explained the labels on some of the cells, some of those locked up started whooping and yelling for attention. We weren't able to meet any of them. We were told that some are in solitary confinement for their own protection, the protection of others, or because they are a threat to others, or the prison. They said that the detainees in solitary confinement must be reviewed every 30 days.
Overall, the massive infrastructure seems carefully designed to warehouse humans, separate them from their families, and deport them as a commodity in a very successful business model. According to Forbes.com, Corrections Corporation of America earned $430 million in 2012 from contracts to imprison non-citizens. The total cost for immigration enforcement last year was $18 billion.
As part of a report done by the Heartland Alliance, National Justice Immigration Center, and Physicians for Human Rights, entitled Invisible in Isolation, the Use of Segregation and Solitary Confinement in Immigration Detention, investigators spoke with a detainee at the Oakdale Federal Detention Center in Louisiana, who was held in solitary confinement for nearly 8 months without review. Guards told him they could hold him as long as they wanted. and that he was not going to be released from solitary confinement. The man was never found guilty of violating a facility rule, but was kept in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day and placed on a no-meat diet to accommodate his shellfish allergy. He ate more peanut butter sandwiches than he could care to remember. I began to feel sick, weak after a few days.
The man told investigators that he was occasionally denied recreation time because of an emergency in the facility. He claimed that the criminal inmates could get to make up recreation time, but immigrants would not. While he was held in solitary confinement, he regularly requested to go to the law library because he did not have an attorney. He found that the library did not have any books at all. He filed multiple complaints to both facility leadership and ICE staff and would regularly speak with an ICE officer informally when she visited the facility. The officer told the detainee that she would like to help, but she was told that her job was not to question policy.
My name is Sean Swain. All I have is this pen, this paper, and the truth. I write to you as a survivor of torture, soon to experience more, in hopes that you will use my account to hear as you see fit to shed a light on the use of torture in the United States. The fact is, when you give your passive consent for your government to torture anyone, you have relinquished power to your government to torture everyone. Your government subjugated me to torture. I'm first. You're next.
During one retaliatory stint in segregation, I learned of torture cell 182. Now, I do not know the name of the man who was in that cell. It was the cell next to mine. He spoke only broken English. His cell had no bedding. He had no clothes, no toothbrush, no soap. The temperature was uncomfortably cold for me, with all my clothing and wrapped in a blanket. So the victim in torture cell 182, to keep from experiencing hypothermia, he had to pace for 24 hours a day, all night, all day. 18 months later, I was punitively transferred to Toledo Correction, where I was harassed from the moment I arrived. Within months, in retaliation for documenting this and contacting the appropriate authorities, I was placed in segregation, quote, under investigation. I was knocked unconscious, handcuffed while I was handcuffed indefensible. I was used as a battering ram to open the steel door leading to segregation. I was left unconscious, my clothes cut off by a X-Acto knife, naked in a suicide cell. I came back to Mansfield Correction in 2009 and was placed on the gang list, you believe this, for my religious beliefs. I was not taken to segregation. Instead, I was taken to a row of cells behind the medical clinic. The cell I was placed in had no bed, no mattress. I had no pencils, no pen to notify the outside world of my treatment. No toothbrush, no shower, no recreation. My food was served in small styrofoam containers that held only starvation rations. The cell had no heat, and I could see my breath in the early morning. So, just like my brother long ago in torture cell 182, I had to pace 24 hours a day to stay warm. I could not sleep. I survived since September. 2 other of the state's victims have not survived. I do not know their names, but two prisoners have died on torture cell row since I was fortunate to be removed from there. They died, perhaps pacing the same cold cement floor that I paced, hour after hour, day after day, feeling 10,000s of miles in the mouth of a graveyard. Their deaths, they were investigated by the same officials who tortured me. I now face the rest of my life at Supermax, locked in a concrete tomb, dying in complete isolation. I've been approved to be transferred to this torture facility by psychological professionals who affirm that I am sane enough to be driven crazy.
I shall not die 1,000 deaths of compromise, giving up names in exchange for food or blanket. I will bite my own arm to smother my screams and rob you of the satisfaction when you disassemble me. I shall not die shamefully, my chin against my chest, kneeling before the humiliating hole I dug for myself, waiting for the pistol shot. I will always refuse the blindfold. I shall not die abandoned and alone, obliterated from the memories of those I love. My fate never questioned. Someone will always stand in the rain outside your office window, my name on a cardboard sign. No matter how many times you cut my throat, or hang me from your own bedsheet, bludgeon me with your nightstick, or fire your bullets into my brain, whether you encircle me in a South African Bantu stand, or a Coca-Cola factory in Bolivia, or alley behind the stone wall, or a prison in the heart of it all. I shall not die. 1,000,000 times I shall not die. You will only get my corpse. My name is Sean Swain. Because I spoke out against injustice, my government, your government, is going to purposely and methodically destroy my mind and disassemble my personality. Over the course of years and decades, my name is Sean Swain. All I have is this pen, this paper, and the truth. Please remember that I lived.
United States prisons hold more than 3 times as many men and women with mental illnesses as are held in mental health hospitals. 8 to 19% of U.S. prisoners have psychiatric disorders that result in significant functional disabilities, while 45% of Supermax prison residents have serious mental illness marked by symptoms or psychological breakdowns.
In October 2011, the United Nations Chief Torture Investigator called on the UN member nations to ban nearly all uses of solitary confinement in prisons, warning that it causes serious mental and physical harm and often amounts to torture. Juan Mendez, the UN Special Rapporteur of Torture and Cruel, Inhumane, Degrading Treatment, presented a written report of solitary confinement in the United Nations General Assembly's Human Rights Committee, which singled out for criticism the routine use of Supermax isolation in the United States. Mendez stated,
I am of the view that juveniles, given their physical and mental immaturity, should never be subjected to solitary confinement. Equally, in order not to exacerbate a previously existing mental condition, individuals with mental disabilities should be provided with proper medical or psychiatric care, and under no circumstances should they ever be subjected to solitary confinement. My recommendations are, first, to see that if we can complete a ban on prolonged or indefinite solitary confinement. And I define that as anything beyond 15 days of solitary confinement, meaning someone being confined to a cell for at least 22 hours a day.
So, What are some of the alternatives to solitary confinement? And what can we do right now? Begin the reform of the classification system using the Mississippi model, where the reform of classification system led to the significant reduction of Mississippi's solitary confinement population, including the transferring out of approximately 800 supermax inmates at the Mississippi State Penitentiary at Parchman. Rather than leading to an increase in the problems, there were significant decreases in violence.
Support mental health alternatives to solitary confinement in jails and prisons, including individuals and group therapy, regular access to psychiatrists, substance abuse counseling, and specialized psychiatric service units, discharge planning, and community reentry assistance.
Implement training for correctional officers on how to respond to individuals experiencing psychiatric crises in ways that de-escalate rather than escalate these crises.
Inmates should not be placed in isolation longer than 72 hours.
Impose a 7-day limit on supermax stays for inmates being investigated for in-prison crimes.
Stop the brutal cell extractions of uncooperative and often mentally ill inmates.
Use informal sanctions to discipline unruly prisoners, like taking any commissary or recreation privileges as alternatives to solitary confinement.
Create an independent monitoring board, an IMB, consisting of local volunteers who perform inspections of the facility and submit an annual report.
A quote by Fyodor Dostoevsky to remember: the degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons.
My name is Robert Stockton, and this is my poem, Living Tomb. Suddenly we found ourselves without the world's care, where the cold and desolate embrace our stare.
Through endless mazes we walk in chains, and with each passing day it seems less and less strange.
With a will not broken, tested with time, we send words to our loved ones. We are doing just fine.
There's nothing to compare it to but small personal lies. We do anything to keep away needless tears in their eyes.
New rehabilitation as a castaway, whether young or old, means we are tossed in a place with no hope to hold.
To escape, we walk in circles under a steel screen, trying to find a way to kiss the sun's beam.
We stand alone arguing what to do. No one really knows the pressures we stew. Rules come and go, changing direction like the wind. When you think you've found comfort, a new struggle begins.
Some stand agitated at the back of their cells. Some scream out insane and broken up yells. You may have a glimpse of what we all see, or a mental picture of a soul who's not free.
But no one can really see beyond the gray walls that loom, or walk where we walk, embraced by a living tomb.
Readers, I'd like you to introduce you to our readers now. Anthony, Sherri Walker, Kevin Michael
That's it.
K. Bob Gordh, Craig Walter, Paula Brooks, Dayvon Williams, and Sidonie Smith. Now I'd like to bring to the stage our director, Morna Martell.
Big Shepherd.
See, you wasn't here.
Coming your way, Big Arm.
People, we will now have a discussion. I hope some of you will stick around to hear our wonderful guests. They will be coming up to the stage. And as they do so, we are going to be passing around for donations. The donations are going to be going to the Unitarian Universalist Peace and Social Justice Committee, and our co-presenter tonight, the Committee on Racial Justice.